Afternoon, everybody. Hi, welcome to our fourth webinar. This topic today in the series of Understanding Occupancy is focusing on physical needs and assessments. I welcome everybody that has joined already. And let me do a little introduction and learning objective. I'm Siglinde Chambliss, and I'm facilitating underneath IEM, Innovative Emergency Management with Olvin Vargas, the training session for today. It is an interactive training session, so we would like for you to be asking questions, participate in the polls. This is your peer-to-peer opportunity to have discussion and enrich your knowledge base or add to the knowledge base for others. So we appreciate it. Our learning objective that we set for today's webinar is participants will understand how to improve the knowledge on the physical needs assessments and all the resources that you may have available to assist housing more individuals. Participants will learn about the tools and best practices available. We have opportunity to also engage with our HUD subject matter expert, Mr. Doug Hillman, that we will have join us and give us insight, as well as learning how we can use physical needs assessment during the asset repositioning efforts and identifying capital needs in particular. So welcome. This is a big comprehensive PowerPoint. I hope you find it enlightening, and I hope it will strengthen and further deepen the understanding on occupancy, why these topics are so interconnected. Next slide, please. Good. We got some housekeeping rules, so please keep in mind everybody will remain muted during the webinar unless you're invited to unmute. So how do we behave? We have some get familiar with your screen. We have a Q&A link on your screen. You should find it. You can chat, but we really want for you to use the Q&A. You can raise your hand. So when you want to speak, we will open up and unmute your microphone, and then you can raise your question or add to the topic, but use the Q&A link to do that. We also have at the end a email link that we will share with you when you have additional questions that we did not answer during this session, that you will be able to email in, and then we will give you a response. We also have taken the time and paused to answer questions, and if they are not fully answered, we will also invite you to send a follow-up email and make sure that we respond and you have all the content that you need. So this particular session as well, just like the previous session 1 and 2, have already been posted on HUD Exchange. Please make that part of your favorites. There is ample of documentation out there for you to be well equipped with just about a wide variety of topics that you need to know. Next slide, please. We've added in, and we understand there is alphabet soup. So to get around the alphabet soup, we have created a separate slide and gave you acronyms. You can always copy them out and create another listing and just add to the other, from the other presentation, the other additional acronyms that we have that are relevant to this particular webinar in your glossary. So please, that is available for you. For those that have actually just joined and began working for HUD, I understand alphabet soup is just an everyday thing, and you have a tool that you can put in your toolbox. Next slide, please. All right, let's get ready with the overview. Overview on physical needs. So what is it? It's a foundational document. It's something that is used in business for the real estate market. Everyone that is a homeowner understands that there's usually somebody coming out and does inspection. I think we can find the bridge and view it as a regular homeowner for ourselves, just like in our housing authority, our housing stock. Somebody has to look at those properties and say, you know, what are the functions of the document, and give me a report. So view it as your like big inspection report. It is a periodic examination because it's only requested when we have a real need for it or when somebody tells us that we need to have it to really determine long-term schedules that we have to prepare, maybe as part of a financing and a pro forma, where we need to estimate how much on the reserves we actually need to set aside for major replacement items, whether that's systems related, building envelope related, or inside of units related. So it could be a variety of things, but it's your report card. All right. What do we also call it? You see it, aka also known as, it has in the lingo soup a lot of acronyms: conditions needs assessments, green physical needs assessments, physical conditions assessment, capital needs assessment, rental assistance demonstrations. On the red, we would need one, or physical conditions assessment. So, you see in the acronyms right there, all means the same thing. Next slide. When is it required? So it's not just a nice to have, sometimes it's a must document. It's nice to have when you know you have resources available and you really have inherited a portfolio and you don't know, but when you must have it, these are conditions placed upon from lenders, from HUD or other organizations. In our environment in housing, we currently experience this with when we do RAD conversions. So it would apply whether you do project-based RAD conversion or your project-based rental assistance conversion. And you also would need to have it for any rental assistance program when you do conversions or mod rehabs, having units that you're converting under this particular program with HUD and converts to PBV or a PBRA contract, the alphabet soup. And, the nice thing about this slide, when you see this and when you have access to it, when you see something that's highlighted in blue and makes reference to PIH notice, please pay attention to that. These pieces are hyperlinked. You want to click on them, download them, and then also save them in your favorites. And that is the complete final implementation for the project conversion or planning requirements outlined that you would need to consider. But these are actually hyperlinked and live links. You can click on them and it will open up your reference document for you. You don't have to look any further or search for that particular document. Next slide, please. Who requires the physical needs assessment? So I've already alluded to that on the RAD conversions. It's a requirement, but also sometimes we require it or we are required to produce it when we work with HUD and family housing multifamily loans, including your substantial rehab, multi-financing, and you see some numbers here when we do a specific loan type on the HUD 221D4 loans. Somebody would give you that as a definition, or a HUD 223F loan, the loan types that are used for financing or purchasing or rehabbing buildings. There are specific loans available. They're a little involved in obtaining, but the interest rates in the current interest rate market are still much lower than what you currently can get through your bank and other financing. So sometimes it's worthwhile to plan for these kind of financing structures and become familiar with these type of loan types and what they require. And of course, when you do complete refinancing of existing debt, and there is another option available on the HUD 223A7. And I say this because for those that have been in this industry for a while, you remember when we went from public housing to HOPE 6 and we had tax credits and we needed loans. There may have been some of these types in there, and now we may be converting them and do something different, maybe a RAD conversion through PBV or PBRA. And so these particular tools are attractive tools if you're unable potentially to have a tax credit deal, so to speak. And so take a moment to become familiar with those, but necessarily, as I said, physical needs assessment, nevertheless, the lender wants to ensure that you have a viable property. And that's the whole point about this particular requirement for physical needs assessment. Next slide, please. All right. PNA, of course, is the center, the focal point here, and you see all the nice little arrows that are pointing back to the center. what is it being used for? What is the purpose, or how do I really optimize the information out of a physical needs assessment? What does it tell me? Well, for preventative maintenance, you can use it and set up and strengthen your preventative maintenance plan. You can use it for budgeting, because when you know what's deficient, you need to plan for it through procurement and budgeting and have an idea what it will cost to support the efforts to renovate or improve. It provides a due diligence, especially when you have a sale or purchase or refinance on the current value of the building, if it's not being improved, and what it's worth. Determine the replacement cost or the reserve needed in the future through your pro forma calculation, how much money you need to set aside, and if you have enough. And also strengthen your operating procedures for real estate management through operations, where you may need to consider, hey, I don't want to improve that in 10 years. I really want to stretch this to 15 years, because sometimes, as you know at home, when you take care of a water heater or your HVAC unit and you have routine maintenance, the item lasts longer than the expected shelf life of a particular equipment. So it's the same thing. And assisting marketing and repositioning or strategic planning for your assets, where you can determine based on this report, well, how much longer do I really need to have, and how pressing is the decision that I have to make to actually make improvements, or I want to sell or refinance. Next slide, please. Benefits, additional benefits, I would say, because the previous slide was essentially a benefit as well. The data points that you derive are enough to help serve the intended purpose of the housing. We always refer to it as providing health, decent and safe and sanitary housing. The HUD in particular assesses the capital needs for the public housing inventory, and also the estimate on the conditions of backlog. So now we know, for those that have been in housing industry, the capital fund program has been underfunded, but in order to work with the Appropriations Act, we have to be able to determine or communicate how much money is needed to continue press for the budget authority to help raise the value of the capital fund program formula for our inventory. And sometimes we know it's not enough, but if we are unable to produce documentation and numbers, then HUD cannot fight for their budget piece to spread the funds across the nation for the necessary improvements. It also shows, or has been used for backlog data to support RAD conversion. So think of the administration and the Appropriations Act and how we can help our constituents to actually make a point on why more funding should be made available for these particular efforts. Next slide, please. So here's an excerpt, and it's a more recent excerpt. It actually comes, and it has been derived from a final document from HUD that was done. And again, you see down there on the slide deck, there was a capital needs main report done in 2010, and NARO has taken the opportunity from that report and updated it last year to show and support the capital need backlog for RAD conversions. And as you see, the numbers, the trend is just going up, and it's been estimated through 2020, $70 billion. So the growth annually projected is $3.4 billion. So you see there is a great need. And of course, it compounds at 8.7%, 8.7%, and inflation currently does not help with the rising cost and addressing those deferred maintenance needs. But it just helps, and I encourage you to spend some time reading this particular report to see and evaluate how your authority can use everything that's out there to bring the property back into better envelope standard to provide better housing for individuals. Next slide, please. So this is a great slide, and I here will invite Doug to speak to this and provide us a little bit more insight on facility conditions index and ratios, FCI in short. And as we say, the smaller the index number, you see that's an excellent score. And the larger the number, the building is not in a good condition. And so for this particular slide, I invite Doug to speak to this particular ratio and the importance of it. So open it up for Doug, and then hopefully we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Sig. So yeah, the FCI is an industry standard that's recognized kind of throughout the facility management ownership world. Is really just trying to classify the amount of deficiencies you have in your building portfolio over its replacement value. And so if you think of it as a percentage, and if you kind of draw back to what you were talking about as a percentage of your home. So for instance, if you have an FCI from 0 to 5% is really considered to be quite good. So $100,000 house with a 5% FCI means you've got about $5,000 in maintenance backlog items that need to be repaired. And so yeah, I think most people could recognize that there's some things in their home that would represent 5% that need to be fixed. And then kind of when you march upwards of that ratio, from when you go to 5 to 10%, that's where your facilities are really kind of tending into the more poor conditions. And then above 10% is typically thought as the condition has now become poor. If you get your FCI ratios up into the 40 and 50%, at that level, your facility is probably beyond its useful life and likely needs to be either demolished or completely retrofitted. So the ratio is a good way to be able to kind of understand what the backlog deficiencies are against the value of the asset that you are working with.
That's great, Doug. And you know what? I just remembered the obsolescence testing. So if I were to do the calculation of the FCI ratio first, I can pretty much determine whether I need to go and spend money on the obsolescence testing and get more the refined information for HUD needed to prove that there is actually obsolescence. I think I take that as a yes. Next slide, but correlated. Next slide, please. All right, how do we calculate the score? We take the total cost of deferred maintenance. So obviously we need to have a plan and understand what our deferred maintenance costs are and divide that by the amount of the replacement value. So if I know I have outdated air conditioning units and they need to be replaced, I find out in the catalog and shopping around how much air conditioning is and how much it costs to install. And I do this over the whole portfolio. There you can calculate your ratio associated with that. But that would be just air conditioning. This FCI score is really applied as for the whole inventory, so the whole building. So it's all the items associated with the building that have a deferred maintenance and need to be replaced in order to derive your score. I want to pause here for a minute because it was a lot that we have said already and shared, and see if there's any particular questions that you may have, or in the Q&A, I'm checking here with my colleagues, that I should be addressing. Do we have any, Helena?
Hi, Sig. Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is something you can really address off the cuff here, but there was a question about this person here attending that asks if it says, can you also help guide PHAs with a sample of scope of work for PNA? I'm not sure if that's something you can succinctly address here or not, but just wanted to flag that for you.
Okay, sounds good. We do have a slide a little later on in the presentation that talks about how to develop it, and I think that will help with the scope of the PNA. But I think it's definitely a good candidate if you want a more inclusive answer to answer that in a full email and put all the resources associated in it and maybe a sample RFP.
Okay, I
That's
will
how I would
provide this
answer.
participant with the email address that's also provided at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Right, sounds good. Awesome, thank you. And I do want to remind and pause here for a minute, the slides are not emailed through this webinar. They are posted after everything is finalized, and this particular webinar is recorded, and therefore you receive the full recording, all the slides, make sure there's no errors in the slides, all the links are properly retesting or working, and they will be posted for you after the presentation has concluded and everything has been answered in full. Then it will go to your HUD exchange, but the slides will not be handed out today. Next slide, please. All right, FCI continued with the research of the work, and you see there's a lot going in there, and I'm going to pause for a second as well for those individuals that are not familiar with ISO. I have not heard that particular term, International Organization for Standardization. There was in the 55,000 series in the family on the ISO standard. So what is it? It's a building standard. There's many ISO concepts that have been standardized. So kind of a European standardization model that is adopted in the United States. And it says, if you follow this particular standard code, then these are all the things that you're going to get out of there if you follow them. And they are rated, and they have policy, strategy, capability, and procedures on how to maneuver through. And then when changes occur, they always change the ISO number. So that's really the term, the ISO number. And this particular one is in the family of the 55,000 if you want to research it. And it tells you all the standard terms and definitions that you need to know about asset management, as well as specific requirements for what is considered an effective system for asset management and guidance on how to implement management systems. So if you have never heard of it and gone through the life cycle engineering, I would highly recommend to, again, you see the hyperlink is on the slide, that you go through that. And if you're one of the larger authorities that have an engineering department, great. If you are in operations and you want to strengthen through your maintenance supervisor and your team at the property level the understanding for asset management, this is a perfect opportunity to go through that and learn together. And of course, the deliverable output that you receive by going through something like that as an experience, you can get all the mechanical integrities taken care of and understanding for that. An asset management plan that you can help build, and an asset health index by property that you can standardize and apply and work through. And I'm pausing here and make sure, Doug, did I really give it justice on this particular slide?
Yeah, most definitely. I think the point here is it's kind of this is most definitely an industry best practice around asset management, and then a physical needs assessment, and using those needs assessments to help make facility investment decisions is kind of some of the key takeaways.
Okay,
and so
great.
this is just a tool that can help an organization if they want to kind of pursue the kind of the gold standard as it relates to asset management. This would be an example of a system you could implement.
Okay, it's like you're getting like an A on the scorecard. And, I was just thinking about that question, helping to build a scope of work. There's probably language in there that can be used to derive pieces out of it to get that scope of work for the physical needs assessment. Just hint, borrow from everywhere you can. Next slide. We're pausing for about 1.5 minutes to conduct our polls. So this is timeout. And
sorry, Sig, if I could just interject on your point about scope of work. Another source for scope of work would be GSA. So the General Services Administration provides. They have a blanket contract for facility condition assessment work. So if you Google search a a GSA contract around physical condition needs assessments, you should also be able to potentially get a kind of a draft scope of work to help.
Great, wonderful, thank you. So what are the poll questions for today? No rush. Again, you get 1.5 minutes and we will see the answers of the poll questions as we conclude them. They're simple yes, no. So it's just filling in the bubble. Don't worry. Have you performed a PNA or CNA in 2022? We want to know because we are trying to gauge or understand how many of you are thinking about it or have done it. So it helps us. Have you performed the PNA in the prior year? And you know, the prior year was eviction moratorium and of course through COVID. And I would expect the answer to be probably less, but maybe not. Maybe that was your opportunity to do that. And did you outsource the assessment or did somewhat an in-house assessment? And were you surprised at the results of the report? Yes or no? So just simple yes, no. Poll is open. You still have enough time to pick a bubble. It's an A or B bubble, yes or no. That's it. 4 questions. Have you done a PNA in 22, in 21, outsourced it, and were you surprised? Many of us know that we're not surprised at the report. It just validates what our gut already told us or other management reports. We have 15 more seconds. Don't be shy. All right, the poll is closed and we're just waiting on the results. They usually don't take very long to display. So we go do, 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 do. Almost there. All right. So yes, a small number of amount. We have 260 participants today, so a small amount, 10% have done a needs assessment. And we have about half did not answer. Have you done in the prior year? Just about the same answer or the same percentage. And did you outsource? The majority of it was outsourced, and 1/3 and 2/3 kept it in-house, and 1/2 did not participate. And then did you see surprises in the report? Some did, so I guess they thought they had a better portfolio. It's good to know. And the vast majority were not surprised. I guess just validation. I wanted to pause and see if anybody wanted to talk about the experience that they had with their physical needs assessment that they have conducted in 22 or 21. If anybody wanted to share, raise your hand so you can unmute and maybe share with your group. Have any takers? Again, don't be shy. These are your peers. This session is for you. Any takers? Not yet? Good to go. That's fine. Maybe the next poll. You take me up on that. Next slide, please. Goals and objectives of the physical needs assessment. So the big picture is in legislation, which I alluded to in the opening of the statement. We want to make sure that we have something that can help support annual appropriations. So talked about that. But also don't forget the Energy Policy Act of 2005, when the efforts are all focusing towards maximization of energy conservation. So we want to be able to help not only legislatively, but also at the HUD level to fight for those resources, and at the authority level to give us the resources that we need. So again, it's about strategic planning inputs, being able to prioritize your funding needs and your limited funding environment that you're working with to find alternative resources to fill the gaps. The synergies and efficiencies that could be created when you have physical needs assessments conducted or updated. They're not just conducted, they can also be updated. And then being able to speak to your story and those stakeholders that you have, whether they're in the city, the county, at the state level, at the federal level, when there are resources available to show your picture and be able to communicate them, because you have actually documents that show your situation and your need. Being able to really organize the data, have it in such a state that somebody can understand it, put nice pictures and graphs in there. And where I was saying earlier, maintenance can get a lot of information out of that to revamp or revisit how effective your maintenance program is on site, and whether you need to maybe consider outsourcing or need to strengthen the understanding from the current staff that you have. You can use those physical needs assessments to do alternatives and model and see what options are best for you and your community. And sometimes this is not an answer that you derive yourself. You need to broaden that and bring that to other stakeholders to create those long-term viabilities in your current program structure. So just look at it that it's very comprehensive. It can give you a lot of different information pieces to derive your objectives for the authority. Next slide, please. The physical improvements needed at the development site are always based on HUD standards, and it identifies the needs what you need from what we call the term modernization to upgrade and improve the property, the pieces that can or are needed for the standardization on energy conservation, so we're not spending half of the budget on utility costs. You know that we already have been mandated to provide the smoke and carbon monoxide detector. So again, reminder, those grants are out there now. The deadline date is in April for the application to get those resources and get those into your properties if you win the application. And of course, being able to develop the standards for equipment and structural elements. The physical needs assessment for capital needs helps you to also improve what you maybe need to plan for and project in your 5-year plan. When you still have public housing units available and you have your capital fund resources allocated to you on an annual basis, although they may go down as you dispose, demolish, and convert through RAD. However, for those resources that are left, you can still use that information and help better plot the information and make a visual for your tenants, your staff, the executive director, to why these particular pieces are planned in the 5-year plan the way they are. So it helps with communication. And of course, housing authorities, management practices for capital-based planning is best supported when you have something that speaks to it, what is actually needed. Next slide, please. We have alluded in the opening, of course, and now we go in more detail, and you see the slides get a little bit more packed with information, but we want to make sure that when we walk away from this webinar and you have the slides, you have immediately the maximum amount of information available on that slide. So what is it being used for? Long-term reinvestment decisions? What does it all include? We talked about demolition, the most severe, the obsolescence, disposition when you decide it was no longer needed, or when you go through a conversion, whether it is choice, whether it is RAD or any other disposition form, maybe through your development arm or sale, a disposition, then you need to be able to have all of these pieces together through the physical needs assessment. Through conversions, we talked about that. For capital financing, we talked about that when it's necessary. Any redevelopment activity that you may consider public housing to a Section 18 blend or so, it can help you developing the strategies. And of course, repositioning of real estate assets in general for maybe considering another community and add on an expansion. So take a look at those pieces, evaluate, but see it as a objective to why it is, good to have a physical needs assessment. It's not wasted. Green activities can be identified and funded through the capital fund program, and of course that will fund or support the HUD's performance goals to create energy efficient housing, which you want to be able to articulate. And remember, the housing authorities operating subsidies are coming up, and when you have those energy efficient with utilities, this is one other reason why you want to be able to create physical needs assessment to obtain that energy efficient goal, and measures to impact on capital funding for appropriations. We talked about that because there's never enough money, but we can fight for money. Next slide, please.
Sig, I just want to pause you here. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A that might be worth a pause and discussion. And it might be you, it might be Doug. So I was going to scroll back up a little bit. There was a question about the ISO piece. And the question was whether there's an overlay within the parts of that cycle that it is prominent in. That, I don't know if you want to scroll back to that slide, Olvin, it might make a little more sense, I guess, with that in front of everyone.
15, I think. Slide 15. Yeah.
Again, this might be a question better for Doug, or if the individual who's asked the question, Ozaro, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, I apologize. If you want to unmute and maybe ask the question, you had some additional follow-up questions, it might be a good opportunity just to unmute and go ahead and ask. If you're still with us.
I would just say that, the ISO process is just kind of like what I said before, kind of a gold standard on asset management. And so, if you were to pursue an ISO certification around asset management, you would likely be using something like the physical needs assessment to help you understand, what your assets are, how well they're performing, where your needs are. So that's kind of the tie-in there.
It's almost like an accreditation for college. Maybe you can equate that to when you want to build a bridge. You need to go through something that says, I have this gold standard, or your A rating with bonds.
It looks like, were you able to get yourself unmuted, Ozaro? And again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. You had a couple of questions here, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask them. Oh, maybe not. They popped up at the top of the list.
Some of the questions. The other question was about mold and defective installation. So yeah, a good physical needs assessment would pick up on defective installation and show and likely show those as deficiencies that needed to be resolved. Mold would be questionable. If mold is a function of inadequate ventilation and it's widespread in an area, that would likely be picked up on during a physical needs assessment. If it's just a function of, mold in the shower or something like that, then no, it wouldn't likely be picked up on. Another question, when talking about long-term investment, does restoration?
I think the question there is restoration considered a reinvestment?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah, I was also going back to the mold and the other deficiencies. So not only do you see that in your regular routine preventative maintenance, but you also see it, or it's noted in one of the previous seminars, we were talking about REAC inspections. So definitely it's part of that. But the physical needs assessment, other than maybe the visual, I'm not quite sure if there's a specific box there that would say there is mold present. So it would be more through, I will put that in the category of preventative maintenance and your REAC inspection. So that's where you would pick that up immediately. But I guess no later than the physical needs assessment, because it looks more to structures and systems, the physical needs assessment. If there were no other questions, we can go back to the slide where we left off in the 20 range after poll. Yep, this one right there. All right, so who can perform the physical needs assessments? We already alluded to that most likely you will have an RFP, and we know we can go to the GSA website and Google or search for facilities assessment work to get an idea for scopes of works. But we have a lot of internal information, and don't discredit that. When you are a good size authority and you have access to your own consultants or engineers, your local architects and engineers, structural engineers, skilled maintenance staff, many maintenance staff nowadays that we can hire, or as we revamp how qualified an individual needs to be to work at our assets, we look at that they have certain skill sets that they bring right up front, or put them through the training program so they can pick that up for maintaining preventative maintenance plans, being EPA certified, HVAC, and so forth. Your city and county, your local partnerships that you have, your code enforcement, you can get ideas from there, or some, hey, can you take a look at that? And your own staff that works with these particular items through HQS standards, your inspections that perform those inspections, your work orders, look at your REAC inspections. You have a lot of insight available to let you know whether you are on the path to really get it refined and have a physical needs assessment to help build, to save that money, and then formulate the scope of work so you get the best out there that can perform and quickly give you the physical needs assessment so you can do something with that information. But you have a lot of information available in-house to just organize and look at that data. Next slide, please. How do we compile or using the PNA report as a capital planning tool? Well, there is two categories. We have immediate needs, of course, just like in the REAC inspection, we are required to immediately address the health and safety and short-term items that we need to do to help improve the score or to help improve the conditions of the housing for the tenant. And then those long-term investment decisions that we have to consider. But you need estimated cost to help you identify what you can do immediately, short-term or long-term, because long-term are usually more costly and require more time in planning for finding the additional resources. And that's where operations and fiscal works close together to help solve that problem, that money problem that we have. Next slide, please. This particular slide is focusing also on the strengthening of internal routines that we should nurture and develop to allow us to even get to planning. And that's why I bring up again maintenance, routine preventative plans, work orders that are identified, that are repeat or constant for the same type of categories. But the PNA gives you the deficient conditions of the deferred maintenance, or validates whether you have deferred maintenance. If you are out of compliance with any of health and safety codes, or any units that require worked on that are vacant and offline. So there, I remind you right here, for occupancy, make sure your information is clean in PIC, and if you do need to request those updates, make those updates so it's not negatively counted against you while you are preparing and planning for this. And always keep your local HUD office informed about that in case it takes a little longer, because in the current industry or the current environment, things take a little longer. And if you're in an area where you have an emergency, if you're out in California dealing with the floods and fires, things are going to take a little longer. If you were down in the South or now in the Midwest with the tornadoes, things are going to take a little longer. So everybody will have an understanding, but just keep that in mind. And your work requirement will tell you your long-term needs and how the market can actually help you fill the gap, because with the current supply chain, which we still feel the squeeze, you may have no choice. Although you want it short term, it will come a long-term planning because you're just not able to get the resources, the materials that you need. Of course, you need to look and see what your state and federal regulations are as far as compliance for those work items. For example, elevators code, you don't have a choice. You have to take care of it. And that's by statute, by law. And so other conditions are also identified where you have no choice, including health and safety. Of course, any increased energy efficiencies that we can incorporate to prepare for this long-term viability and be able to do a really good cost analysis and how we are getting to the end result of financing the repairs. And sometimes the answer is we can't do it. It's not there, and you have to completely dispose and get out of it. Next slide, please. Unless I think I saw a long question coming through. Next slide, please. All right, so what tools are still available? You know that the HUD green PNA is not available. However, the data points can still be extracted from PIC until HUD revamps the system. So you can go into HUD PIC, PHA PIC data. You can pull that through the EPIC system. And when you have a consultant, since the majority of these files are readable documents, either extract in Excel or some other text format, a consultant could import that particular data set, so you don't have to manually derive all of those pieces in an Excel, or the Word document would not be a good functional tool. I think right away Excel, but you want to be able, you see here in a download history, it comes in an XML file format. You can still download all your information, and out there on the market, the consultants that you deal with, you will be able to most likely have some data points import into whatever software they use to derive your PNA. And you can also use, as it shows here, as a resource, HUD Form 52829. Next slide, please. All right, let's look about REACT physical condition standards. We've had a presentation on that, but this is just kind of making the bridge and the connection for the standards and what the elements in the physical needs assessments are based on. You see all these tools are interconnected and taken away also from REACT inspections. So it starts out in public housing in the financing program when you use HUD Form 52829, physical conditions assessment, green physical conditions assessments, your UPCS, Uniform Physical Conditions standards that are used, other building industry components standards that are being used, and we heard of the gold standard, the ISO, and then of course anything as far as what REACT compiles through the physical needs assessment that is tied to your physical assessment subsystem score, your PASS score. Next slide, please. The components, not a surprise for the PASS score, is 5 categories. It's your site, your exterior systems, common areas, and units. And you see this kind of repeated in several sections where the green PNA follows the same sample. And that's why this particular process makes it very user-friendly, because we're already accustomed to that. We're already familiar with that. The capital needs in the certain areas are focusing on whether it requires replacement, needs to be refurbished, whether there is accessibility, marketability, and sustainability. So it looks at all these 5 factors. Next slide. The procurement, which we had that question on getting to the scope of work. So you can, based on price, determine, of course, how the work will be funded, or also advertised, of course, for procurement, and or what vehicle you may use, depending on your thresholds. It may be considered a small procurement. It's definitely a small procurement for the most part, but you can use any of your unobligated capital fund grant dollars that you have to conduct a physical needs assessment. You can use project reserves if the project already has reserves. It was one of those that converted through LIHTC on the HOPE 6 or whatever tool, you can use your project reserves and fund a physical needs assessment. In your current development budget that you have and you're preparing, you can use dollars set aside on the fees and costs, or in your refinancing under the loan, you can also finance. You can float the money first and then get the reimbursement back through your loan cost that you're incorporating. And I make a note here because operating funds or funds left over through operating subsidy and renter income from at the site level when other resources are not available, it is highlighted that you must first take care of the items necessary and needed at the site level for operations, and only if there is unused funds not needed for normal operations that you're required to do, could you use an AMP reserve to fund your physical needs assessment. So that's a caveat, it's a note, but it gives you an idea of eligible uses. Next slide, please. We're almost at our end. This is your second poll opportunity and sharing of information. So here for questions. Question number 4, of course, has 3 options to answer, but you have 1.5 minutes. 3 questions are yes or no. Are you planning on conducting a PNA? Do you see a benefit of investing in a PNA? Do you have currently available funds that you are aware of to handle the outcome of a PNA? You think your authority is prepared? And do you actually have an idea the estimated cost of a PNA? So we throw this out there and assess what you are aware of or what you know, so we can help you. Do you think the PNA is less than 5,000 or less than 10,000 or less than 20,000? So simple questions, but meaningful questions, and help us to learn if we sparked enough, provoked enough ideas here to see whether you use that as an opportunity and gain more knowledge about your assets. So please don't be shy. We have another half a minute to answer the questions. And share your thoughts with your peers. I want to throw that out.
Hey, Sig, while we're letting folks complete the poll questions, there is a question in the Q&A that you might be able to answer. Is the cost estimate per facility or the portfolio cost?
It goes by facility. Each AMP is separate, right? So if you dispose of an AMP, it's always AMP specific. So it's by property. But you can also calculate the inventory when you compile it all together. So you can do each property and then together.
Great, thank you.
All right, the time has passed and it doesn't take long. Here are the answers. All right, so yes, we have about 2/3 from 1/3 planning on having a physical needs assessment done. So that's good. I applaud you. And you do see a benefit. We have a good number, almost 100 participants here that say they do see the benefit. And we have about half that did not participate. And do you have funds available? So I see some know that they have funds. It is about half, 50-50, yes, no. And then estimation on cost. So let's see. Less than 5,000 was 21 answers. Less than 10,000, 39. Less than 20 was 33. So from experience, and Doug can weigh in as well. Of course, I invite him or others here. I think it has a lot to do with the size of the property as well. There's no cookie cutter here, right or wrong, because it's size of the building, how many units and so forth. But just to get an idea, and physical needs assessment update that I was currently engaged with and needed an update. The original was already done. The update alone is $5,000. So don't let those physical needs assessment expire if you can't help it, because updates can be just as costly as actually doing a physical needs assessment. But 120 units, the update was 5,000. So the new one up to about probably 10,000. Doug may have other additional insight. Maybe there's a standard of cost that we should not exceed, or it's considered costly, or maybe there is a per unit cost. Because if I would,
It's going to vary. It's going to vary by the size of your property. Most condition assessment work is estimated on the square foot level as you get to higher volumes. But if you have a very small property, and especially if you're contracting out with a consultant, there's going to be a fixed cost for just them to be able to cover the expenses to travel to the site, do the surveying, create the reports, and have the appropriate meetings. So it really depends on the size. But
right.
as you get to be a larger entity, you'll more likely be able to bid it on a square footage basis.
Got you. And when you have more properties, I guess when you bundle, I use the progressive advertising term here. When you bundle, you can negotiate and get it cheaper. But I just calculated the update alone for 120 units was $41 a unit. And again, it's just one dwelling building, huge building with three stories. But the better you are prepared at the site level as far as information that you can provide in a workable format, it usually helps lessen the cost. So that's one of the experience takeaways that I have. Is anybody out there that can give another sample or an idea on cost that can share with their colleagues? Anybody willing to do that? You don't have to say your name. Time on in. Nope.
There are a few other questions here. I don't know if you wanted to touch on these briefly before we move on to the next slide. So there's a question in the Q&A. It says, if you use capital fund for the PNA, is it fees and costs or management improvements BLI?
Well, HUD converted and everything is 1480, but in the traditional model, if you were brought up like me, the houser in the old standard in capital fund, it was a fees and cost. So it is fees and cost, but when you draw it down in logs, it's 1480. But when you do your EPIC in the description, it's still fees and costs, it's consulting.
And another individual asked if they need a certification to perform PNAs. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
And I defer to Doug as well. You get what you pay for. If you're in your references, in your RFP or in your quote, don't require certain background or the quality of your consultant that performs the PNA, they are certifying and attesting to their numbers. Somebody is going to use those, right, and performs financing. So I think you get what you pay for. But if they are certified and they have done this over and over, like when you go to the dentist, would you have one that does general routine cleaning, perform your extraction? Probably not. So the expert gets it done faster with better quality, and you may pay a little bit more, but you're not going to have these repeat costs or a bad survey. I think that's how I want to equate it.
And also many of the specialty contractors that do this kind of work, across different asset classes will have built tools to help summarize the data in more usable manners. So yeah, my experience would be, if you can work with vendors that are in the condition assessment business, you'll most likely get follow-on tools that are more useful to you as an end user.
Agreed. Any other question, Helena?
I think that's everything right now. Thanks.
Okay. All right. I think we are about at the end. Next slide. All right. PNA for repositioning efforts, since red, of course, is the buzzword of today in the alphabet soup. So again, as a reminder, PNAs won't improve your project management planning, but it helps with good project management plans that provide a focus. So as you see, we've talked about improving routine maintenance plans. We talk about being able to use this tool to train your staff, identifies the needs that you need. It helps with the procurement planning process because you can clearly identify based on your thresholds, whether it's small procurement, larger procurement, well, physical needs assessment, obviously small procurement, but anything that derives, the work that derives out of there, you can put it on the planning phase for you and do what you need to do to get it to the procurement level. Helps you. We talked about the obsolescence testing when you calculate your FCI score, and of course, how you're best able to address your financial gap that you may have and get to this financing. Because you may decide you need a 9% tax credit deal, you may need 4%, you may need a Section 8. Section 18 blend, you may qualify, you need some HUD financing. There's all these kind of opportunities or options out there. There's no right or wrong answer. It's what tools do you have available that you can execute on, getting to the property, to the repositioning that you need. Next slide, please. Resources. So we never leave any training session without resources. We always have resource slides. And as you see again, they are hyperlinked for you once the slides are posted. But there's, of course, the RAD demonstration, the final implementation. There's a revision 4 out there, PIH Notice 2019-23. If you want to jot it down, if you need it now and you can't wait until this is posted, your physical needs assessment report from 2015, the report from the House and Senate Committee, then also the 52829 Capital Fund Financing Form is available for you so you get an idea. We have Q&As and handouts from asset repositioning for you, the ISO 5500 standards in asset management that we talked about all on one slide, and then of course the HUD Exchange webinars series where you can find it so you can link on that more quickly and have access to all the yummy materials that's already out there. And as you heard what I said, yummy, yes, all of that stuff is yummy, and we just gobble it up and soak it all in and make all sense out of it. Next slide. Q&A. This is for you. Any additional questions that you have, pause here, put it in your Q&A, or your next slide will actually give you an email address and instructions on how you can email questions to us. You send it to hudcc.trainings with the S at the end @iem.com. Please make sure you use in your subject line PHA Occupancy TA post-training follow-up questions. That's a mouthful. And include in your body of the email the name, the requested name, the requested PHA, the training topic that you attended. So this particular training topic is in the subject line. The specific issue or question, be brief. And then an email and phone number where we can reach you in case we need to have a dialogue and get clarity on the question that you have, so we can give a comprehensive response back to you. And with that, I believe we are at the thank you. Thank you for participating today. You could have done many things today, but you chose to attend this particular session and gain more insight on what physical needs assessments can do for you. We have gotten good information on many different materials and resources. I thank you, Doug, for the dialogue and the information that you shared with us and your insight. Thank you, Helena, for managing the questions, and thank you for the participants. And with that, I say goodbye and have a great day. Thank you.